Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Hello there! Playing Karma here with a new episode of RBY Bytes. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, we saw what's often called Dexit, the idea of removing Pokemon from the national Pokédex of a mainline game, making them unobtainable even through trades. However, this was hardly the first time such a thing has occurred. While some would gesture towards Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, as demonstrated in Tamashi's great video on the subject, there is actually another example of Dexit that happened even earlier. In fact, it was before we even saw Pokemon Red and Blue in the West. So, what game did the first Dexit? Well, it was the very first release of Pokemon Stadium, exclusive to Japan. You could click off now. Wait, no, stop, let's talk about this a little more, I promise it's interesting. Don't get confused with what the West knows as Pokemon Stadium. That game, called Pokemon Stadium 2 in Japan, is completely different from what I'll call Pokemon Stadium 0 for the sake of this video. For one, only 40 Pokemon were available. Why 40? Because of the Space World National Tournament in 1997, that year's entry of the Nintendo Cup. If you haven't heard from my other videos, Nintendo Cup is a series of official competitive formats that were run for the first two generations of Pokemon. This actually made Pokemon one of the earliest widespread esports and was instrumental in the game's early success, even being streamed on television. Stadium 0 brought the best Pokemon from the Space World Tournament to 3D, alongside a few others for type representation, so the hype would only increase. In fact, the winning players' teams were immortalized in the game's level 50 to 55 division mode, down to the stat experience and DVs. You could say this game is a time capsule for the early understanding of competitive Generation 1, and by extension, Pokemon as a whole. However, that means some Pokemon known for competitive success in modern times, like Rhydon, Victreebel and Persian, were underestimated back then and subsequently left out. Rhydon is a particularly glaring omission, eclipsing Golem in viability in both Nintendo Cup and Generation 1 overviews from a modern perspective. Stadium 0 was also the first Gen 1 game to begin making changes to mechanics. It nerfed Blizzard's freeze chance, nerfed sleep, fixed dig and fly, and made recoil moves not damage the user when carrying a Pokemon, among other things. However, it also kept some old mechanics that aren't around today, such as Hyper Beam not recharging upon a KO, and you can still land status like Paralysis behind Substitute. This makes for a super interesting blend between RBY and the West Stadium 1, in a way that some enthusiasts find more enjoyable than either. Personally, I have a hunch that this game prioritized bug fixes rather than outright buffs and nerfs, which may explain why this game has different mechanics to Stadium 1. I mean, if you KO a Pokemon with Hyper Beam, you're not expending all your energy, right? Or maybe they didn't change the mechanics because they were cool? I don't know. True to the Pokemon choices and bug fixes, this game was designed mainly for the competitive scene, featuring its own Nintendo Cup format in Nintendo Cup 1998. While Stadium 0 featured 40 Pokemon, there was an even weirder catch for its competitive format. It had a level cap of 30? Because of this, Nintendo Cup 1998 de facto banned an additional 7 Pokemon out of the 40 legal, including the legendary birds, fully evolved starters, and Dragonite. I'll flash the full list of legal Pokemon on the screen for you. In total, only 33 were allowed, making it a micrometa. This level cap nerfed a lot of Pokemon in very strange ways. As in RBY, you don't have breeding or heart scales to get moves at more flexible levels. If you're not at the correct level, you can't get the move. Here are some notable examples. Exeggutor no longer gets access to its iconic powder moves, which are obtained in the 40s, forcing it to use Hypnosis if it wants to land sleep. Interestingly, Jolteon is unable to learn Pin Missile to check Exeggutor. Additionally, due to Pokemon Yellow only being released days after the official tournament, it's also unable to get Double Kick, as it only gets it at level 42 in Red and Green, compared to 30 in Yellow. Painful, just painful. It was almost legal. And Alakazam is exactly a level off getting Recover. Ouch. There are a few others, but these are by far the most egregious and metagame defining nerfs. I would go as far as to argue that this was very much a targeted decision, given how weirdly specific the level is and how Alakazam is so cleanly restricted. Outside of this, Nintendo Cup 1998 was a Bring 6 Pick 3 format, with Team Preview, Sleep Claws, and the newly introduced Freeze Claws, run natively in Stadium 0 itself, and the first instance of the latter's existence. As was the style at the time, Oko moves, evasion, and other funny moves were still allowed, as these were Smogon inventions, and Smogon wouldn't exist for another 6 years, and it's not even that popular in the East. So, what was the metagame like? Tauros was, in a word, dominant. It wasn't on every team in the 1997 national tournament, but here it was, and it was Commander-in-Chief. There is very little stopping Tauros from running train over the entire metagame. It's likely that this influenced the increased usage of Jolteon, Gengar, and Starmie. Hyper Beam didn't recharge upon KOing a Pokemon yet, and it still had full access to its divine arsenal of Body Slam, Earthquake, and Blizzard. While Blizzard's ridiculous freeze chance was nerfed, it's hardly the only reason to use it on Tauros. It can hit Golem and Exeggutor for heavy damage too. While it can't freeze things with Blizzard, it hardly deters Tauros at all, as it doesn't change that nothing can swap into it, which is an even more powerful trait in a Bring 6 Pick 3 format. Tauros remains the best revenge killer, and in a game where this is indisputably the most important role, it remains king. It's likely that the continued dominance of Tauros in this format was why Hyper Beam got nerfed at all. Jolteon, Gengar, and Starmie also saw almost 100% usage, only being dropped on single teams in the top cut. Jolteon benefited tremendously from the nerfs to Exeggutor, which caused Exeggutor's usage to drop to just 2 in the top cut of the national tournament. This allowed it to fire off Thunderbolts with only Golem to fear. Well, and Dugtrio, I guess. While it lost to Pin Missile and Double Kick due to Pokemon Yellow not being released yet, it ends up not being a big deal for the Punk Rock Dog overall. Outspeeding and hitting Tauros with Thunder Wave is just that important, and it's pretty easy to build with everything it needs being accessible in Celadon City. So, as a result, Jolteon is not just good, it's also a very easy budget option for those getting into the format. Gengar is another example of a Pokemon without much impeding it, still having Nightshade and Hypnosis access, with the ability to use its full moveset essentially. It's possible that Explosion access made it easier to blow past Chansey, a Pokemon that was notably buffed in Stadium Zero's environment, albeit being a late bloomer in the metagame. I'm not sure if Hypnosis is really what you want to go for though, with Sleep being only 0 to 3 turns in this game, so it's probably better for exploding on Tauros or Starmie overall. Speaking of that, Starmie is yet another example of an unimpeded Pokemon, and it still has one crucial piece of kit. Recover. This makes it arguably outclass Alakazam in this format, being one of the only Recover users available and possessing all the TMs to bypass any of the level restrictions imposed on it. It's no wonder that these Pokemon were used so often, they're really strong in level limited formats, and it can all be attributed to TMs. If you learn more TMs, you're gonna be great. Due to Jolteon's learn set restrictions making it extremely comparable with Electrode, Electrode ended up seeing some usage as well. With Explosion in its moveset, it's able to make far more convincing offensive pushes compared to Jolteon, which only has Hyper Beam and Body Slam to offer by comparison. While it only saw one top cut use, from a modern perspective, you could definitely make an argument for it being the better Pokemon of the two. The main issue is the drop in power outside of Explosion, really, but even then, critical hits weren't nerfed in Stadium Zero. Blizzard's nerfs made it much easier for the ground-type Pokemon to function. Golem and Dugtrio saw particularly high usage, with Dugtrio being seen as an A-rank Pokemon on Gold's rankings on Pokemon Battle Historia. Dugtrio's huge speed stat makes critical hits incredibly common, and in a format where the bulk is decreased by level restrictions and fissure is allowed, it can get a lot done. Being able to cleanly contest Jolteon is also crucial, easily taking any attack and KOing it if it's taken even minor damage. Another interesting benefit is that there are very few flying types available in Nintendo Cup 1998, with only Gyarados, Scyther, Fearow, and Aerodactyl being available and legal. These see very little usage, so you could effectively just drop Rock Slide for better moves, like Substitute or Double Team, on either ground type. No, I don't count Onyx. What are you talking about? No. However, a Pokemon that appears to be underexplored from a modern perspective is, well, Exeggutor. Exeggutor only saw 2 uses in the national tournament, but in the modern day, Gold places it in SSS tier. I can totally see why. It trades blows with Tauros, can blow past Chansey, and can even use Hypnosis if it really wants to land Sleep. It's also a useful way to break through Snorlax, a Pokemon that began rumbling in viability following Blizzard's nerfs. Chansey didn't develop too much either, not being used in any of the top 8 teams from the national tournament. This was likely because, in a post-1997 environment, players didn't adjust to the nerfed Blizzard. Whether they even knew it was nerfed is another story. And the higher freeze chance was the primary thing holding Chansey back. The more frequent freezes from Blizzard before helped many special attackers ignore Chansey's special bulk, since freeze just OHKOs it effectively. From a modern perspective, Chansey is seen as one of the best Pokemon available, being one of the few to cleanly contest Starmie, which is otherwise almost unstoppable. A fun side note, given the timing of Nintendo Cup 1998, because of the Pokemon Stamp events being released that year, and the Japanese environment, this format is among the few where you can use Payday Fearow. Is it good? No. Is it funny? Absolutely! In general, the Nintendo Cup 1998 is quite a fast-paced format, not unlike its predecessor, but it has significantly less of a luck focus thanks to the changes to the game's mechanics. Because of the restrictive list of Pokemon though, there isn't much room for experimentation, with Pokemon viability dropping off a cliff once you go beyond, say, Cloyster. That's about all I have to say about the format though. There is very scarce information available, and I'd wager the metagame is just underexplored in general. I recommend trying Nintendo Cup 98 for yourself on Pokemon Showdown, though it's worth noting that they don't have Stadium Zero's mechanics implemented. I'll include a challenge command in the description, but just know that you can't really use Hyper Beam to its full effect, so you won't get Tauros in its full glory. In the end, the Nintendo Cup 1998 National Tournament was won by Norishige Hanamoto, using this team that was immortalized in the Japanese Stadium 2 title. We actually had 2 entire cups robbed from us in the West. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, this is a pretty solid lineup all around. I have a lot of trouble criticizing the Pokemon choices. However, you can see the lack of coverage options for Jolteon that I mentioned before come into play, with it being forced to use Thunder and Body Slam to fill move slots in place of Pin Missile and Double Kick. Interestingly, his team appears to be unfinished. Gengar and Alakazam didn't have the full vitamins outside of HP, so he must have run out of time to build. I'd actually speculate that this team was rushed in other areas too. Tauros lacks Body Slam and Gengar lacks Thunderbolt. I get the impression that Hanamoto just didn't have time to continually play the game to get the TMs he needed. There are a lot of ways he could improve this. But somehow, this isn't the end of it. Like its predecessor, Nintendo Cup 1998 was showed off on 64 Barrio Stadium, a TV show run by Nintendo on TV Tokyo from 1997 to 2001. Think of a show like weekly Nintendo Directs, only with game shows and other weirdness. In the case of Pokemon, they streamed matches, making it one of the first televised esports in existence. However, as if Nintendo Cup 1998 wasn't strange enough, it also used a very primitive form of a tier list for exhibition matches. Pokemon were categorized into 3 separate ranks, A, B, and C, and players had to use at least 1 Pokemon from each, and using all 3 in Team Preview, with the lead being the C rank. It's possible that this was done to try and make the metagame more diverse, but there was never a proper reason given, and the actual real-life tournaments themselves didn't use this rule set. It's possible that this was strictly so matches streamed on TV would be more entertaining to watchers, so they didn't have to see the same Pokemon every week. You'll notice Alakazam is in the B rank, which is very eyebrow-raising, but remember that there's exactly 1 level of having recover access, so it's significantly worse. I'm pretty sure it's still the best choice out of what's there though. This appears to be the first instance of a tier list being used in any competitive scene in Pokemon history, albeit not in the same way that we use them today. This metagame is very deliberately constructed, sort of like cube formats in trading card games. It's overall very interesting. I don't have much information on how the metagame worked, and the only surviving match I have only gave me limited insights. From team building myself though, I do have some speculative stuff. In general, the only C tier worth using seems to be Nidoking. I don't know what demon decided it should be C and Nidoqueen should be B, but I appreciate the opportunity to use an actual decent Pokemon in the lead slot. Machamp and Vaporeon have theoretically okay matchups against it, the former having Earthquake and latter taking hits well, but they seem dubious to me at least. You could use Magneton, but Nidoking brutally counters it, which if used is forced to be your lead. Maybe you could use Ditto if you've had enough shots of Tequila that day, I guess, I don't know, but yeah, it seems that you should just use Nidoking. In terms of B tiers, Alakazam and Kangaskhan seem best. Alakazam is just straight up ridiculous, smoking everything inside to benefiting from the lower power level. The recover removal doesn't really affect it that much, considering these games are likely to go by very quickly anyway. Kangaskhan allows you to use a Tauros without taking up your A slot, which is really notable, especially considering it has counter to force Tauros into using Blizzard to try and beat it. You could also use Kangaskhan and Tauros at the same time through Team Preview, and yeah, that seems pretty ridiculous. Hypno is an arguable choice for dual status access, the ability to potentially restore Alakazam, and maybe submission to Bonk Chansey if you feel like committing war crimes, but it seems kind of meh. I really wish Hypno could use Meditate, but it's locked to level 37, even as a Drowsy. Ouch. In terms of A tiers, well, Starmie is probably the strongest option available, having Recover, insane coverage to delete lower tier Pokemon with, and of course, Thunderwave for Tauros. Tauros remains brilliant, but is less useful with Kangaskhan occupying the B rank. You could use both with a little cost though, as I said, giving you some flexibility in Team Preview, which I do really like. Chansey is a great Starmie counter, Snorlax is ridiculously bulky, Exeggutor is a potential 2-for-1, and well, I could go on. These are all really amazing Pokemon. Here's a team I came up with from speculating on what the metagame could have looked like. You can replace any move with Double Team if you're silly enough though. And well, that's all I have for that. There are some more interesting things about Stadium Zero to share though. Originally, Stadium Zero was intended to be expandable with a Nintendo 64 disk drive, but because of its swift discontinuation due to poor financial performance, the content designed for Stadium Zero's expansion was transferred over to a second Stadium title instead. This is the one we got, or Stadium 2 in Japan. As a result though, there are remnants of disk drive compatibility in Stadium Zero, and we actually know what the expansion disc looked like due to it being shown off a few times. It's likely that a prototype exists out there, but so far it's considered lost media. All of the unused Pokemon in Stadium Zero are actually usable through hacking, but are at varying levels of completion. For example, many Pokemon will just crash the game due to lacking certain animations, usually ones that involve fainting. This makes sense considering Stadium 1's fainting animations are strikingly realistic actually, holy crap. You'll notice that most of these models are also very rudimentary and unfinished. They are clearly designed to just be viewable with the in-game Pokédex, and that's it. Stadium refined numerous models and animations, even making some retcons to lore, such as Starmie being a bit stretchy in Stadium Zero, but not the others. That's weird. It looks a bit unsettling. But that's all I have. Personally, I think Stadium Zero is one of the most interesting Pokemon games to ever exist. It has a very strong indie community-like feel to it, a remnant of a bygone era where Pokemon was, well, a televised esport accidentally made by a magazine company. The infamous announcer and the scene transitions make Stadium look like some sort of TV wrestling match, but with this context in mind, it's much clearer where all this extravagance came from. It's a shame that we're not likely to see another title like this nowadays. Hell, even now, Stadium Zero isn't available on Nintendo Switch Online's Japanese version. It's the only one of the series to not be available in any capacity anymore. I hope that this video was a nice insight into one of Pokemon's earliest and strangest pieces of history. I strongly suggest trying out this game in a legal and proper manner. It's as interesting as it is difficult. This was Pokemon Karma, and I'll see you all next time.